welcome to the Sharpe Way Show. Yes, we are here. It is usually 7 p.m., but tonight 8 p.m. Special day because I have a special guest. That's the reason why. Don't get mad at me. So that's why we're doing here at 8 p.m. On the East Coast, and we are here on the Sharpe Way. Guys, if you care about what I'm doing here and you want people to know about it, why are you looking at me when you should be liking, commenting, and sharing? Do that right now. Like, comment, share, get out there. Let people know that this matters. I don't see likes popping up. Someone's dropping the ball. Click those likes. And if you don't like me, click the sad face or whatever. I don't care. Just click it. I want those algorithms to hit. And if you've got some cash, support the show. Head on over to patreon.com/sharpeway. If you got big dollars, I hope you do. Give me $100 a month. If you don't have big dollars, no worries. $10 is fine. $25 is fine. If you're struggling, because a lot of people are with the COVID response, I get it. No worries. Like, comment, share. That's free. Cost you nothing. Very easy. And of course, you know I got sponsors. I got to be good to my sponsors. I have to. Someone's got to pay these bills here. So if you actually are someone who thinks that CBD is a part of your world, part of your health regimen, head over to Grown Selection. Pick up some products there. Great CBD products owned by a libertarian, right? So do that. Put in Sharpe Way 20 and you'll get 20% off. How good is that? How good am I to you? I'm so good to you. And if you say to yourself, Larry, I watch your show all the time, but I don't know if I'm libertarian. I don't know if my friends are. No worries. Head over to theadvocates.org. Take the world's smallest political quiz. Here's what I guarantee you. You are closer to libertarian than you think. That I'm sure of. You might not be libertarian, but you're closer than you think, and that will show you where you actually stand politically. So do that, and we can all rock and roll. I am very lucky today. Oh, she put her glasses on. I could be in trouble. You get right. No, put them on. It's totally fine. No worries.
The light's going to glare on them. That's all. Okay. It's fine.
I am very lucky today. I have with me running for state assembly in Michigan, Miss Amy East. Thank you so much for coming today. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me on. I'm really excited.
Of course. And for those who want more information on Amy, please head over to east4mi.com. Check out what she's doing over there in Michigan. I'm happy you came aboard because you are one of your big issues is not a common issue at all. And it caught my ear or my eye when I watched immediately. And one of your big issues is cultural preservation. Mm-hmm. It is very rare that I hear that as an issue of someone running for office. That tends to be an activist issue, right? It doesn't tend to be usually the activist is yelling at the representative to do it, right? That's what's usually happening. Yeah. But you're actually doing it. I got to ask a crazy question, and please take it the right way. When everyone's screaming about, Trump is going to kill us, Biden's going to kill us, COVID's going to kill us, why should we care about cultural preservation?
Well, it doesn't immediately jump to anyone's mind. Okay. There are, for sure, within my districts, we have a multitude of issues that we need to deal with, which is education and poverty and economic opportunity. And these are all very important, and they affect people living here today. But we also live in an area that we have a very rich sort of heritage. We have a couple of the neighborhoods, a couple of the towns, and some of the historic buildings around here are very associated, tied to the Underground Railroad.
Ah, okay.
And
that's far up north in Michigan, huh?
We're on the very southwestern portion of Michigan.
Ah, okay.
Right along the Michigan-Indiana state line.
Okay.
But we had a big stop here as enslaved peoples would be trying to escape and then headed on up their way to Canada.
Got it.
And so we have that history here. This is land also that is historically occupied by the Potawatomi people, and some of them still live here. They have a very strong presence here. And so it's also worth kind of learning about them and their culture, because ultimately one of the reasons that I ran for office was to try to bridge the divide that we have going on here and try to heal some of these rifts. Well, your history, the history of your land and the history of the people here can be a very strong point of identity.
Oh, so you're saying, okay, now I got it. You're saying, if I got you right, that
Mhm.
the reason why cultural preservation matters is you can use it as some form of commonality or common ground to bring people together.
Yes. So if you take just the Underground Railroad history within this area,
Okay.
we have, for a very rural area, we have high African American populations in our very small rural towns that you might not expect.
Okay.
And so there used to be free towns, kind of freedmen's towns here, and then there used to be, there's after the Civil War, some other African Americans came up here. So we have more than you might expect. So really, when you're talking about your neighbors, and when you start to look at the history of the indigenous people's history and the
Okay,
white
hold on one
people's
second. What we've seen this year, right, has almost been the opposite. Now, maybe this year's a odd year, obviously, but this year I think most people have said, "Well, that history, well, I view that history different than you view that history,
yeah,
or that's your history, not my history." Or, I mean, we just had Columbus Day, and we had half of America call it Columbus Day, the other half call it Indigenous People Day,
Mhm.
and half to say Columbus is a great guy, and half say he was a mass murderer. I feel like, and for sure this year, the opposite has happened. Am I wrong?
It's definitely a point of contention. I mean, we can't argue that, but at the same time, you have the potential for it to be a very powerful unifier. So you're in New York City,
Yep.
correct? Okay, so in New York City, you have a very relatively recently a big black cemetery that was excavated there that not many people knew about. And when they started to get some of the residents involved, and in places where I've worked in like Virginia or kind of the mid-Atlantic states, when you start to get the people involved, whether that's black or white or whatever, they start to come together. When they work together, they come together and they start to recognize each other as being, neighbors, and they share this history. Here, we had a lot of the Quaker families were
Mm-hmm.
the ones that were involved in the Underground Railroad. And then we had it at some point, we had they call it the Kentucky Raid, where slave catchers tried to come up, and
Mm.
we had the people that were here had to get the enslaved peoples, out of here really quickly. And so you had people working together. And
I
in
like what you're saying. My worry is, and maybe I'm being naive here, but I feel like these are all wonderful things, and I'm agreeing with you. By the way, most people don't know my degree is actually in anthropology, so I love the concept of all this. I remember when I do I'm a leadership trainer now. I often talk about those Civil War sites that I read about as they dug up Civil War sites and things of that sort. But I guess I'm going to the point where you're running for office. I mean, aren't people going to say, "Amy, nice history lesson, but COVID killed my grandma," or
yeah.
"I hate Trump," or "I love Trump," or insert thing here? I'm agreeing with you, but I ran for office. I ran for governor in New York in 2018, and man, people wanted answers.
Well, no, I mean, like I said, we've got big issues here. The cultural preservation thing is kind of a long-term goal because you don't solve these problems
Oh,
overnight.
got it. Okay.
So, you don't solve the problems of giving people a new identity. You don't solve kind of the cultural rift. And we have our state representatives here have 2-year terms,
Mm-hmm.
and they are limited at 3 of those 2-year terms. So these are, in my mind, as an archaeologist, I think long term.
Got it. Okay. So
So
you're playing a
my
long game.
so my thoughts are lay the groundwork, and then this is something that we can continue, either I can continue or other people can pick up the ball, but get the ball rolling.
Okay, I got that.
Because some action and some discussion and everything is better than nothing.
No, I love it. Let me now go to, I guess, when it comes to cultural preservation,
Mhm.
probably the biggest hot topic this year was the statues, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to tear down the statues of the Confederate generals, and it went even further to things like, I don't know, Jefferson and even the founding fathers. It went all the way down there. Do you have a view or an answer or anything that you might want to touch on that? Is that in the same realm, or is that in a different realm for you?
I think it's an indication of where our country's at right now.
Okay.
It's kind of a hallmark of where we're at right now and some of the struggles that we are kind of wrestling with.
Okay.
We're wrestling with our past, and we're wrestling with who we want to be, and we're wrestling with some of the sins of our past. And I've seen a lot of people claim that in taking down statues, you're doing revisionist history.
Sure.
Well, history, if done well, and archaeology, if done well, is a science. And you're always revising what you know, because you know
Right.
that history. So if you take the maxim that history is written by the victors,
Yep.
there's a whole lot of things that happened within that weren't covered or that haven't, so I think it's a fair question to ask yourself whether we should be having statues to people who rebelled against the American government.
Sure.
I think it's a fair question to ask yourself, how should we view Columbus, especially given the atrocities that were committed upon indigenous peoples? So these are questions, and the statues they're a symptom. They're a symptom of a larger thing, I think, that we're wrestling with, the soul of our nation and who we want to be and who we have been in our past.
So if you
So
could
I see
solve
them
this
that way.
problem, do you have an answer? If everyone went to you and said, Amy, what do we do? We'll do whatever you ask. If that happened, do you have an answer? If you don't, it's okay. I'm just asking. Do you have an answer?
I know. I think people need to find their own answers, and it's going to depend on the area. Within archaeology, everything depends on context. Every place, every city, every country has its own particular history, and I think that it's up to the citizens within a particular area to have those conversations. And we should be having a national conversation over, and recognizing that our country hasn't always done the best things in the past. And, we can still think that we're a great country while recognizing that we have done some really bad things.
Okay.
So
let me grab a couple questions if I could.
Yeah, sure.
One to joke question. Have you ever run from a giant ball?
No, thank goodness.
I have. But when the arrows were shooting at me, 2 of them got me. So, but I'm hardcore. I just pulled them out and kept going. So yeah, I've also eaten monkey brains, the whole deal. So I've done a whole deal.
We found gold. I found gold in Sicily. But
look at that. She's better than me. She found gold. Look at that. I love it.
But awesome. I've also dug a whole lot of empty holes to get to that point.
There we go. James says statues should not be built by governments. It's a waste of taxpayer money.
That's a fair point, but I mean, these statues were built by governments before we were alive. So, I mean, it's not like it was our decision to build these statues. And I think there are a lot of statues that are also built. If you want to look at a lot of the Confederate statues were built by, the daughters of the Confederacy or the sons of the Confederacy or something like that. So you're talking about private funds. And I believe weren't private funds didn't they go into like the construction of the Washington Monument? I believe. So the private aspect has been important within the construction of these monuments. It's not just taxpayer money. But, we have to, I think, discuss if we want to build a new monument or even take one down, what's the reasoning behind it? What do we want to replace it with? Who do we want to be? And it's an ongoing conversation.
I like what you're saying because I like the idea of the local people deciding, right? Like things like, for example, taking the Confederate flag off of, I think it was Mississippi or Alabama state flag, one of the two. I forgot which one it was. While I don't like it at all, I didn't want others to force them to do it.
Yeah.
I wanted them to decide, and they did, which I think if you decide to change, well done, go ahead. The only issue is, I didn't want us to force it. So I like your idea of local. I do. Yeah. There is an answer that I think that the problem with what James is saying is a waste of taxpayer money. The problem is they're put on public land.
Yes.
That's my concern, right? And my answer to this is every one of these statues, just auction them all off. And if you hate these statues so much, you'll raise enough money, you'll buy the statue, and you'll burn it, melt to the ground. All good, because you hate that statue. If you don't care, you let somebody who loves that statue buy it, and they put it in their house or the museum, or they put it in their front lawn, or wherever they want to put a statue, they can do it. My answer is auction it off, right? Just auction them off. Whoever wants them takes them, and then you're done deal. They have to pay for getting rid of them, so the government doesn't even pay for getting rid of them. And if you want to burn it to the ground, go ahead. My problem with it is I understand doing it. I totally do. I get how it feels to pull down a statue. You feel like you've done something. See, I pulled a statue down. Racism solved. That's how it feels, right? But that's all it is. It's a warm, fuzzy feeling, and you've destroyed someone's property, right? And now someone has to clean this up. And now it's a disaster. I think the answer is very simple. Auction them all off. If you hate that statue, pay the money, get it, take it in your front yard and burn it, destroy it, crack it up, melt it, whatever. You showed that statue, whatever that is. If you don't, take it and put it wherever you want. I think it makes everything, it ensures that when people want to build these things, that they have to build them with the entire area agreeing for the future, obviously. But more important, it gives you now a future way of getting rid of things, right?
I would think that in most of the cases, given the time when a lot of these statues went up, it wasn't immediately after the Civil War. It was kind of, during the, we say history was written by the victors, but in case of the Civil War, the actual losers in the Confederacy exerted a strong influence over the story of what happened.
Sure.
And so when a lot of these statues were put up, it's not like Black Americans had a lot of power to really say no.
Right.
And so the prevailing way, the rich people in the town or the powerful people in the town, they're the ones that made the decision.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so, hopefully going forward, we can do better at involving everybody within a community, within the conversation. Hopefully we've progressed to that point. I don't know if we have.
But I want to go to another point, though, which is a valid point, which I know you are concerned about. And Amy brings up a point. He says, it's easy to reflect on these questions, reminders, in my opinion, right? So he's saying there's some value to these statues because now you look and go, right? Oh my God, this is what happened, and we can reflect on this. That kind, like almost like a monument. In the same part of his question, you talk often about an idea. I make it the phrase wrong, but I think it's historical value. Is that the right phrase of different things? Historical value. Who decides, right? Is this statue, does it have historical value? And is he right? Should some of these statues stay so that we can reflect on them because there's historical value? To talk about what you just said, right? There was to discuss how Reconstruction failed, right? Is that part of it or no?
I think that is again a question that each local area needs to wrestle with themselves, because however, if you're looking at a statue that's glorifying somebody who, was in rebellion of the nation as a whole, you within the community need to wrestle with that. Obviously, we can have statues or monuments that recognize atrocities but don't glorify atrocities. If you go to, I've seen a lot of people discuss, some of the concentration camps like Auschwitz, or, the fact that you don't have statues glorifying Hitler's and Nazi in Germany, but everybody still knows what happens.
Right.
So you don't need these statues to foster conversation. Right. They are ultimately put up to glorify somebody in most cases. So within that community, you need to be the ones to have that conversation over whether this is the kind of reminder that you want. Is it fostering the conversations that we need to have?
I think that's a valid point. I'll go to a point which, I'll geek out a little bit. But what about if we're going back to the times of, say, Akhenaten in ancient Egypt, right? I mean, we're talking about someone who tried to take down the statues or get rid of, the past by destroying statues. But wouldn't we want to keep those statues, even though they were pharaohs? They were, in many cases, brutal kings of Egypt, right? Is there value to glorifying? And we do. We glorify violent people, but often from far in the past, right? I don't want to glorify Hitler. That's bad. We know that. We know people. But some guy like, some Egyptian monarch will glorify them, and they probably killed, not probably many Jews, but probably lots of people that in that time was a lot. I guess I'm going back to that, who judges that? Do you think even that's local? Should local Egyptians decide whether or not they should destroy statues? Or
possibly. I mean,
the Afghanis blew up those old statues in Afghanistan, and these were from what, 3,000 years ago, something like that, whatever that was.
The damage done in Iraq and Iran to those very our first civilization, that's heartbreaking.
Yep.
I mean, maybe the Egyptians should have this, but again, we're so far removed that we're very detached. It's not like we can, here, the legacy of slavery, we can literally just go back to, in some cases, your grandmother was the daughter, or your great grandmother was the daughter of slaves, or they were living as sharecroppers. And so we haven't reached this point where, a lot of people are very detached from it. We're such a new country here. We are so new that when you talk about ancient Egypt, I mean, everybody they're a symbol in their own right whenever you say Egypt, because none of us living, and things have changed in a country like Egypt so much that it doesn't have any bearing on who we are and what we are like right now, where slavery is such a part of the fabric of our country in our present day that it is, and again, when you talk about Akhenaten, this was a single person deciding, and it happened regularly. They didn't like the old king or whatever, and they would destroy it because it was a single person looking at a threat of his power. Here, we, being in the democratic, the republic that we have the ability to discuss this kind of things and, come to these conclusions ourselves.
So we were talking, though, just recently about, in the case of statues or things of that sort, we're talking about government land.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to the idea of private land.
Yes.
This part, as a libertarian, scares me, right? Because we're all about private property, right? Mm-hmm. So this scares us. So now, where does cultural preservation, how does that affect now my land, right? What if I go into, I don't know, I live in New York City, I don't get to buy land, right? But let's say, right? I mean, you got to be a gazillionaire here, right? My entire plot is 20 feet by 100 feet. It's my entire plot. So anyway, but let's say I go, I don't know, Montana, right? I go to Montana, I buy whatever, 50 acres. Is that a lot? Whatever is the amount in Montana.
That's a nice amount.
There we go. So I buy 50 acres. And I start to, fill up, and I put, what are Montanas? A cattle ranch? Is that what you do?
Yeah.
I do the thing Montanians do, right? I start to put the ranch up, and I'm putting in my hose and such. And someone comes to me and goes, Larry, you can't do that because it was a Native American burial ground or a battleground of the Union Army and some Native Americans, or it's something. How do I my progress versus that, right? And what if I sell my house and this is all I got, and if I can't get my cattle farm up, I'm going under? How do we wrestle with that part?
Well, cultural resource management within the United States, by and large, only pertains to federal lands.
Okay.
And Indian.
I thought also Native Americans too, right?
Indian lands too, yes.
Thank you. Yes, okay.
And that it does include like military bases or federal parks or things like that. So federal land. Most states do not have a statute that governs archaeological survey on state land. Most states, some don't, or some do. And occasionally you have a county, like you have a county or two around DC that actually have county laws,
Okay.
where if you want to do development, it's been when I used to live out there, I used to live out by Baltimore, and then I used to live out in other parts of Maryland, and I worked a lot in the DC area. And so some of those counties out there, because the development is at such a scale that, it's just wiping away a lot of their history.
Yeah.
Some counties in particular
Hold
were
on.
actually
So
able to
you're
make that.
telling me that if I'm digging my holes and I literally find, I don't know, a rifle from the 1870s, I find one, right? And I go to my, I don't know, local museum. I'm sure there's some in Montana that have that kind of thing. And I say, hey, Montana, here's this rifle I found.
Mhm.
Do they just go, thanks, and that's it? Or do they come to me? Do they offer me money? Do they just say, good luck? What happens?
Good luck.
Oh, okay, that's what happens. Okay.
Really, there's not much that you can do if you find a site on your private land.
Okay.
Now, and in fact, we have in a lot of cases, a lot of sites that have been damaged by farming over generations, mounds, things like that. And chances are nothing's going to be done with it unless, say, something happens, a development happens, and one of these statutes that are be federal or state level are engaged.
So, in
And
your view, do you think that's something that we should be concerned about? Right? The archaeological, the anthropologist, let me say it right. The anthropologist in me is concerned, right?
Mhm.
At the same time, I don't want history to be destroyed. At the same time, I don't want to trash some guy's farm, right? I kind of want both. Is the answer, I mean, it's going to sound cheesy, but is the answer education? Is the answer awareness? Is that the answer? Or should we be trying to hammer people who, happen to buy land that has historical valuable site? And if that's so, how do we decide how valuable that is? Again, it goes back to my worry is, and the reason why I bring this up, I need to go where I'm coming from. I'm coming again from New York City.
Mhm.
In New York City, we have a thing called landmarking. It's in other areas too, but it's really big in New York City. So big that something like a third of all land in Manhattan is landmarked. And what landmarking means is the local community says this land is historically significant and therefore it cannot be changed unless the community board agrees to it. Now, while I actually don't mind at all if you personally want to landmark your own land, totally fine. Your land, do what you want. But according to New York City, your community can landmark your land without you wanting to do so. They can say, that plot you bought, yeah, I know you were planning on changing it, but you can't. It's landmarked because the community says so. And the worst part about it, some people their heads going to explode when I say this, but the worst part about it is they will give you no money, no compensation. You are responsible for all taxes, all upkeep, everything, but you may make no changes unless the community tells you that. That is my fear of the future, right? That I see that, and so immediately I get scared. But at the same time, do I really want them knocking down buildings in New York City that are from the 1700s? No. So I'm torn. I don't want you to knock down your building from 1702. I don't want you to. And I don't want to have a system to where the wealthy people do this so they can keep their land value up because they don't want public housing in their area.
Yeah.
So they instead landmark their entire area so you can't put public housing in it, and it keeps their property values high. So they're not actually doing it because they care about the landmarking. They're going to keep property values high. So do you see where I'm torn on this?
I do, and I understand why you're torn. One of the things within cultural resource management within the United States is it is a constant balancing act.
Right.
It is a constant balancing act between that preservation of the past and the needs of the future. And every single case is different. And every time that you identify a site, if you identify a site, you've got a list of questions really that you have to kind of apply to tell whether it needs more work, or eventually if it is significant in some way, there's criteria to match that. And then, if it is significant, well, then the kind of the pie in the sky is if it needs to be, or if it is worthy of being put on the National Register of Historic Places. There's a whole bunch of checklists to go through, but the constant, just because you find a site or just because you have an old house doesn't mean that it's cool enough, I guess, to preserve.
Okay.
And so every property should be able to be assessed kind of, and I understand like the communities, for a whole community to be designated as a landmark is something really cool. But I would say that if you're going to buy a house, then they ought to tell you that up front.
Sure.
That should be something that would be required. After the fact is a little bit different. But and we do have some really gorgeous communities within this country, and New York's such a historic city in so many ways. But it is a constant negotiation of, just because I found this site, is it special enough? Does it tell us anything extra? Does it inform us in any way?
I'm going to go back then, and let me go back to that same piece then. And again, I worry because I'm in New York City. My brain is New York City, so I'm just being clear where I'm coming from, right? So I'm totally biased. I see big developers control these things all the time.
Yes.
Right? Big developers control this all the time. And the little guy or gal who buys that house, they are screwed.
Yeah.
They've got no chance. Big developers going to say, oh, your house, it's in my best interest for that to be historically significant, therefore it is, or it's not in my interest, therefore it isn't. So I want to go back to the idea of who decides, right? If we just let a politician decide, then that policy is going to be bought by the developers. In New York State, it used to be that finance was the biggest, lobbying group in New York City. It's no longer anymore. Now it's real estate. So with real estate being the largest lobbyist group in New York City, I mean, wow, right? I had a guy in Department of Buildings. The Department of Buildings of New York City, I did some training for them. I did some leadership training for them. And during that time, one of the guys in the class was telling me, I was asking him, what's the purpose of Department of Buildings? And most people said, oh, it's to make sure we build safely for the public, blah, blah. He said, no, it's to make sure the developers can build. He literally said that openly. He wasn't hiding that fact. He's like, no, we exist so they can build. That's why we exist. So big developers can build. So that's my worry. Again, I'm getting scared again. Help me, Amy. I'm feeling scared. Help me. How do we figure out who's going to be the one who says, this is special, this is super cool, this one not so cool, without being in a pocket of some big developer who says, I got the cash, whatever I say is cool is cool.
Well, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but it's hard. So archaeology, being a subfield of anthropology, is historically on the side of the little guy.
Oh, okay. I like that. I didn't know that.
Yes, okay. Very much so. And it's been that way for so much of its history. It is, kind of tried to really get involved in social justice issues and trying to promote the voices of marginalized communities throughout much of its history, especially within the United States.
Okay.
And so coming from that, as somebody who has that background and that desire to see justice done by the little guy, and yet in most cases being paid by the developer because they have to do this work as part of their permit.
Yep.
It presents quite a struggle at times.
Absolutely. If you're one who's always saying no, they're going to stop hiring you.
Yeah. And And I would say that, the archaeologists that I know are some of the most ethical people I've ever met, but there are bad archaeologists.
Sure.
Um, but
So
there,
if you could decide, if it's you, they come to you and they go, Amy, help us out. How are we going to figure this out? Do you think the right answer of the people who should be making this decision, does this fall back to local people? Does this fall to, college, professors who are on a panel in your capital city? I mean, where in your view, where do the people come from? Or is there simply a rubric that somebody puts together and goes, okay, hit these 4 things, therefore cool, didn't these 4 things, not cool?
Okay, well, I'm going to back up and give you a little primer on cultural resources law in the United States.
Okay.
Cultural resources law really started with Teddy Roosevelt, 1906, antiquities laws, because
the national park system.
Yes, so much was being done, and it was damaging, indigenous sites all over the place. Skulls being stolen, put on display. There were all these kind of travesties, right? So since then, we've had several cultural resources laws, and there's one called Section 106 that is enacted anytime federal monies want to go into a project like building a road.
Got it.
Building a pipeline anytime you need kind of a federal permit. And then there's also other work that's required. You have to do a cultural resources survey for all military bases and all national parks.
Okay.
But that's something separate. So anyways, so we have this cultural resources law that dictates that, that you've got to look for a site before you can start digging your road,
Okay.
or you start putting in your pipeline. Great, right? So, in other words, like, the archaeologists go and they're working with the state historical preservations officers or the tribal historic preservations officers, and they formulate a plan. And in most cases, in my experience, we didn't feel an extreme amount of pressure to bias our findings.
Okay.
I will say I've been very fortunate in that. However, there aren't any real penalties if the developers wipe out sites.
Okay. So in this case, the developer just says, look, thank you, Amy. Here's your money. I don't have time. I'm blowing through anyway. Right?
Or the whole, well, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Sure.
We didn't even realize that it was there. So it's a constant negotiation. Now, I will say I worked on the Keystone Pipeline briefly, and I will say I have worked on the oil spill in the Gulf, the BP Horizon oil spill. And in both cases, I could see, obviously, the Gulf oil spill was the case of a big corporation ending up making a bad decision that is going to affect the people of the Gulf for generations. And in case of the Keystone Pipeline, I will say that was one project where we were very pressured to work against what we thought was ethical in order to make ground and write off sites. But in most cases, I haven't had that, thankfully.
Well, let me move to New York State, because you just went to the environmental piece, which I wanted to bring that up too. That's another one of your kind of pet issues, right? But cultural preservation, and the other one is environmental. And New York State has all those problems. New York State has Native American lands. New York State has environmental disasters. New York State has all kind of stuff like that, right? And what I've always said I wanted to create, the problem that we have in New York State is just what you just said. There's no punishment. Who cares, right? There's no punishment, right?
Yeah,
no punishment. So guys and gals will do whatever they want. Corporations do whatever they want. So in New York State, we have the DEC, right? That is what controls our environment, right? They deal with the environment issues. They have no real teeth, right? Or if things go wrong, they go to the EPA, which has no real teeth. And the average American thinks the EPA and the super fund will fix everything, and they believe all that stuff. But it won't. You and I both know that. My idea is get rid of the EPA's teeth, period. No teeth whatsoever. It can't enforce. Don't expect it to enforce. But instead at a state level, create what I call the EVU, which is the Environmental Victims Unit. The problem as a general rule is you have an attorney general here in New York State. There's some kind of disaster, whatever, a spillage or insert bad thing here. People are hurt. The corporation who did it, because it's always corporation. So the corporation who did it goes, oh, you know, it's a corporate decision. We made a mistake. By law, EPA, we don't have to spend X dollars, whatever's in that rule for that regulation. Here's your $100,000. We're out and we leave. That's what happens. So what I'm saying is the attorney general of a state has no idea how to prosecute that. Clueless. They have no idea how to prosecute. You might as well tell them to build the shuttle and take it around the world. The results will be the same, right? There is no chance. So I'm saying you build an actual environmental victims unit, a unit that is within the state that says, let's find a real victim. Is there one? Their jobs to decide, is there a victim? Is there a victim when there is a cultural problem? Is there a victim when there is, maybe Native Americans are affected by this, right? This unit figures out what the actual victim is, if there is one. This unit can also pierce the corporate veil. As you know, it is very hard when it comes to environmental issues to pierce the corporate veil, right? No, we don't know it was the corporate whatever, right? But they can help pierce the corporate veil and literally hand the case to the AG and say, we've done all the work. Here are your victims. Here is what we think they actually did. Here, AG, prosecute. And what I'm saying, if you find actual victims, not just this is bad, that's not a victim. An actual victim, kids who were hurt, adults who were hurt, literally people who lost their loved one's burial ground. Those people are physically hurt. You find actual victims. Because when you say things like Exxon did this, no one knows what that is. That means nothing. Or this tribe or this nation was affected. We don't know what that is. But if you actually said Bob Jones and Jane Smith of Exxon made these decisions that affected the burial remains of these 4 people, everything changes. Everything changes. I actually believe that the senior level regulations of the EPA are more harmful in the actual outcome than having nothing. And if you create an EVU within each state, once the guy or gal who's going to make the decision at company A knows that it might be them affected, and once an AG gets, here's a case for you to prosecute, I did it for you, it's wrapped up in a bow, just walk in and get a conviction, I think it changes. I believe DC has more power. I think the environment gets cleaned up. And I think you create localized standards, not the EPA regulations, which everyone gets around because corporate lobbyists wrote it anyway 40 years ago, so it doesn't even work. But if you make localized standards that connect to the EVU that say, if you want to work in my area, you must do X, Y, and Z, and no Superfund. So now insurance has to cover everything. Everything. If insurance has to cover everything, they will help the EVU make standards by default because they don't want to pay everything. And they're not going to insure people to build a pipeline. They're going to pay $1 billion if they screw it up. It's not going to do it. It would change how we do everything. Is that too radical? Am I wrong on this?
It's interesting. My first thought would turn into, what would you do in situations where there's no person who's a victim? Biodiversity can also be a victim. Or if there's no victim there right now, you look at the Gulf oil spill, and like I said, that can affect people's livelihoods for generations. Sure. And so the victims change over time. And I also had one, I talked about this, I was doing a cultural preservation town hall with the Democratic candidate, congressional candidate just recently in our area. And I brought up that I worked on a case. It was it was 20th century archaeology, which is not anybody's idea of a good time, to be honest. But we were working on a cattle dip vat
Okay.
in Florida. It was on a military base. And what used to happen is that there was a big problem with ticks on the cattle, and it was bringing up disease. And so they would basically take these cows and walk them through this chemical filled loop, and go down and then go back up. And we were mapping all of these. Well, what they wanted to do was remove them because
remove what?
Remove these cattle dip vats. So they're all concrete. And so we were mapping them and documenting them and photoing because they were going to remove them because all of those chemicals that had been used for the dip to kill all the ticks had leached into the ground.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And so this happened in the early 20th century, maybe mid 20th century. Okay. So these organizations and these farmers aren't there anymore.
Yeah, they're gone. Sure.
They're gone. So in cases like that, who becomes responsible for footing the bill for, any victims if that gets into the groundwater and it perks into modern populations? Then I think you've got questions of who foots the bill.
Who you have now?
Well, I mean, right now it's the land of it's the military land.
So why would that change?
Well, the military didn't put in these cattle dip vats.
So no one's responsible now.
I mean, right now it was this was a while ago. It wasn't getting into the groundwater. So they were removing these. Thankfully, they identified them early enough, but the potential was there. And so they've been monitoring them.
So what I'm saying is if we have an EVU, this is literally their job.
Mm-hmm.
So now as governor, you can say, if you're the governor of Florida, you say, hey, EVU, we got this problem. Figure this out. This is your job. This is what you do.
Yeah.
The AG's never going to do this. Never. The AG's going to wait till someone's in trouble and say, sue somebody civilly. That's what's going to happen, right? Right now. I'm making this up. You got cancer from this, whatever. Mm-hmm. Sue somebody civilly. Good luck with that. That's all that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you have an EVU and you task them, walk down this road. Right? This is your job. Walk down this road. How can you find a victim? And if you do, what can you do with it? And in some cases, as sad as it will be, there'll be no recourse. In some cases, there won't. Right? But you could at least, if you at least had that, you could then create something else. If there are victims and as an EVU unit, you can do something else. You can create a nonprofit that people will actually give to.
Yeah.
Right? Right now, no one's going to give voluntarily to the Superfund. No. Right? No one's doing that, right? No one's doing that. But if you had an actual environmental victims unit where they would say, you come out and say, look, if this kind of thing happens, there's no recourse. We don't have a way. Can we please create the Central Florida Environmental Victims Unit Nonprofit Association? And someone will do it. And before you know it, there's money there. And there's money there for that issue, but only when they find a victim.
I got to tell you, I would be open to anything that would allow us to address some of these issues in a way that's impactful.
Yes.
I mean, so much injustice is done, whether it's from the past kind of impacting the present, or whether it's current bad actors,
Mm-hmm.
Corporations who just don't care about the little guys. I would be open to any suggestions that helps the people, kind of reclaim some of that power, because
I'm with you.
The little guy just doesn't have anything. And
when you talk about communities working together, I love that. Some of the people were commenting, yes, communities working together. Love that stuff. Absolutely. And what I think is I'm not a fan of a lot more laws and regulations. And the problem is because when you create regulations only change when corporate lobbyists change them. That's how that works. Regulations always get around by corporations. That's why the EPA fails now. That's why Superfund's garbage, because of that. But if you make it to where, again, I use that phrase because that's what moves people. When you say environmental victim. The
Mhm.
average American goes, oh, there's a victim? It's not some dumb snail that I want to eat. No, it's a person that's a victim, that someone was hurt by this. That will get people to care. That
Yes.
will get people to give. And we found it when we saw actual victims in many places, Hurricane Katrina, right, etc. I made that one up. It's the first one I thought of. But people gave money like there was no tomorrow. I think you can create an environment to where I don't have to add more regulations. I can create localized standards, add insurance companies, which means taxpayers don't pay any extra money. And the insurance company itself and the local people will force people to build better. If you break that corporate veil, now you can't hide behind your shareholders. And I don't want you to hide behind your shareholders. Do the right thing, man. Yeah. I don't care if you got shareholders or not. Do the right thing. I think if we go that route, my view is we could actually have safer building. There will still be bad actors. Mm-hmm. We'll have safer buildings. But those who are bad can actually be punished. And I think when they're actually punished, there'll be a whole lot less of them.
It's definitely something worth considering. I mean, seriously, I'm all for local people being empowered to do what they need to do. Because, again, context is everything, and what works. And one of my problems with with some of the regulations that we have now is that they're kind of globally applied, and they don't allow for the flexibility for local areas to adapt them to their particular circumstances.
Sure. Makes sense. Yes. I always worry about the idea of the broader it is, or even the idea I see all the time. Yeah, well, we're going to give you some money, but we admit to no wrongdoing.
Oh yeah.
Right? And wrongdoing doesn't mean that it hurt anybody. Wrongdoing equals didn't break a regulation.
Wrongdoing means I'm just going to pay you to keep your mouth shut.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes. Here's money. Or you also find something else. Something bad happens, right? The oil spill or, chemical spill or insert thing here. The first thing they say is, we've done nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And what they mean by that is we followed these regulations that our lobbyists wrote. Right? Our lobbyists wrote regulations. We followed them, so we're fine.
Or they mean that they covered up their tracks well enough so that they won't get caught.
That too. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Andrew's all about bigger government sucking and small government rocking. See, that's what Andrew's about. He's all about that. So yes, there we go. I love that. Well, look, I like what you're talking about. I hope you see where my head was.
I do.
Right.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
That's where my head was. And I also I just thought it was, you were more unique in that most people are just yelling Trump bad or Trump good. That's what most people are yelling right now, right? Or, do something with my economy, or do something with COVID. That's what most people are yelling right now. I'm sure you have views on that too. I'm sure you do. But this to me seemed very special. And I'm glad you were able to take some time out and talk about it.
I'm glad. I told my friends, I was like, anytime anybody wants to talk culture and environment, I was like, pull up a chair. Well,
no. I love it. I love the idea.
Nerd out. I'm always about nerding out. Are you kidding me?
So I want to bring one more issue, but I'm curious to your thoughts on this. In New York State, I want to build 3 nuclear power plants.
Okay.
I want to build Gen 4 nuclear power plants, virtually impossible to melt down, right? Just not going to happen. Do you have a view at all on nuclear power? Good, bad, indifferent? Do you care either way?
I don't really. I mean, I'm always concerned about the safety, obviously. But I worked on a project in Southeast Texas they had intended on building a new nuclear power plant down there, and I think it didn't go anywhere. Because it was supposed to be one of the first that had been built in so long. I'm always interested in different ways that we can get power, because our country is, hungry. Our country is ravenous for new sources of energy. And as the population grows, that need is going to grow and grow and grow. And obviously, fossil fuels are a finite resource.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm, I have to say, I'm intrigued by nuclear power, but again, you know, I'm always a little bit hesitant, I guess, and would want to make sure it could be done safely. But I'm definitely haven't written it out.
So let me go to the other one, which I think kind of almost fights both sides of the environment, and that is wind power, right?
Mhm.
Wind factories, wind turbines. I mean, I just did an event today in upstate New York with a bunch of people who are really unhappy about it. But their logic is, while it's supposed to be, right, a greener energy, right?
Mhm.
That's the idea. But according to them, it also hurts the environment too, right? It isn't just, I mean, it kills birds, not all the birds, but it does kill some birds. And in our case, it kills, I think it's golden eagles in upstate New York. I think that's correct. It's one type of eagle. I think it's golden eagles in upstate New York. It will do that. It provides some low level noise,
Yeah.
all things like that. Do you have a view on that? Do you think, you know what? And I also remember someone saying, and this is hearsay, so I may be wrong on this. Hearsay was that the actual polymers used for the blades are non-recyclable, so they just pile up someplace. Do you have any view on any of these things? Because it seems to fight both in my eyes.
I've heard about the bird issues and possibly maybe even bats.
Oh, okay.
And maybe kind of migratory sorts of issues. And I have heard about the noise, the kind of high pitched noise. And I also just saw a headline just recently about people with solar panels, and some of the first solar panels are starting to die. And where are they going to be recycled? You know, what are they going to do with some of these precious metals that aren't particularly safe? I I like green energy, and I would like to see more research and development put into them, because obviously the environmental impacts are concerning. As somebody that, you know, loves the environment and you know, wants to make sure we're doing these things as safe as possible. And I guess it always falls back to, for me, that need to find balance. That need to balance some things in terms of our needs for the future. There's one environmental regulation that sometimes archaeology gets involved in. It's called NEPA,
Okay.
and the whole point of a NEPA investigation, which can be very time consuming and very thorough, is not to prevent a project from going forward, but a real NEPA investigation should offer different alternatives.
Okay.
You have like a primary alternative, and you got
Sure.
different alternatives, and you got pros and cons of each alternative. And in so many of these cases,
So who does this?
um, biologists, marine biologists, archaeologists,
Got it. Okay.
you know, it's a whole suite of
All right. I got to ask one last question about this. What I hear all the time, one of the best ways of helping our environment, grow hemp. Where do you stand on hemp?
I think I just saw something recently that
I'm
actually,
throwing some stuff at you tonight. I like this. This is good.
no, it's good.
I like it.
Actually, no, I just saw something recently that was attacking hemp, and I honestly was really surprised. I wasn't I was surprised by the argument, because everything that I've seen has been very pro hemp. And I got to tell you, I mean, as a country, we used to use hemp, industrial hemp. It's huge.
Absolutely.
I think for me, the promise of hemp, industrial hemp, or whether you're doing CBD, or even, I mean, marijuana is legal in Michigan. You know,
New York.
there's a lot of promise in some of these things, and
Well,
I'm all
you
for
just said CBD. So since you just said CBD, everybody, for 1 second, watch this. Hey, it's Larry Sharpe, host of the Sharpe Way show. Want to talk to you for a couple of seconds only about CBD products. Look, if you think that they should be part of your health regimen, or they already are, you're dealing with maybe pain or anxiety or some other issue, head on over to grownselection.com. Check them out. They're a libertarian-owned company. They understand that you own your body and should treat yourself the way you think you should be treated. Of course they do. You do too, and so do I. So head over there, check them out, look at their CBD products. If you think they fit your health regimen, put in Sharpe Way 20 and get 20% off your order. Look, I want you to support the Liberty Movement, libertarian-owned businesses, and the show. They're a sponsor. If CBD is or should be part of your health regimen, grownselection.com. Check them out. Purchase Sharpe Way 20 for 20% off. Support the show. Support the movement. grownselection.com. That guy is smart. You should do what that guy says. Oh my God, do what that guy says. Absolutely. You gave me the CBD opening. I had to do it, Amy. I'm sorry. I had to do it. I actually had to do it.
But no, I think as far as going back to hemp, I think hemp's got huge potential.
Yep.
I think that sometimes, from what I understand, I'm not an expert in this, but from what I understand, some of the regulations make it particularly hard in terms of just how much THC can have it, and the processing facilities that make it particularly hard for farmers in our area to grow and make it a viable resource. So I would be interested in seeing if we can, kind of update that, particularly since, marijuana is legal now.
Yes, absolutely.
So stringent. And
I actually had when I ran for governor, I had a thing that they just mentioned. I said regulate them like onions. That was my entire thing when I ran for governor. I was like, let farmers grow, let them have a cash crop, let them figure out what works well for them. Grow cannabis in any way you want. Hemp, you want to do a special marijuana for sleep. Do your thing. Just let people grow it. Make it like onions, and people enjoy it, and hopefully we'll have more informative, more information on it, so that people will actually not use opioid products.
Yes. And opioid addiction is a big thing here. And so, I'm fully supportive of CBD and marijuana as, both just for medical and also recreational. But, I know people whose lives have been changed by that, and gotten off of opioids. So I think that it is a powerful potential, but also industrial hemp in terms of fiber, in terms of paper, in terms of all these resources. If we can kind of transition away, that well, then, alternatives are a good thing.
Absolutely. Shirley likes you. She says, very informative. Thank you.
That's my mom.
There we go. Shirley likes you. Very good. Thanks, Mom. Appreciate it. I love it. There we go. You're special. So, look, is there anything else you want to bring up before we wrap this up?
No, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. No, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate that. For those of you who want more information on Amy, please go to east4mi.com. I'm sure she's more than happy to geek out with you about anthropology and stuff.
Always.
I'm sure she will. You can go ahead and enjoy. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope it was valuable for all of you. I will be back on tomorrow night, of course. This time, 7 p.m. I'll be good. I'll see you all 7 p.m. Have a great night. Amy, thank you so much.